what is the purpose of RYM? What's the purpose statement? We talked about this yesterday, right? I'm writing a POM, right? What's the purpose? We're reaching an equipment. Reaching equipment, right? Reach and equip. Okay? Principles. Remember those? What are those? Justification, sanctification, good.
And sometimes glorification.
That's right. I like to put that in there. Some people disagree. Mark Lowry probably wouldn't do that, but what does he know? No, I'm just kidding. I am being recorded. It's a joke. Goals. Goals. Remember the goals? Good. Good for world life for you. What else?
Evangelism.
Evangelism missions. Fellowship service. Growth and grace. DNG. Alright. Now, we also have something called presuppositions. Okay? And there's 6 of them. Does anybody know what these are? Anybody? Try to guess somebody.
God's at work. Is that it?
God is at work. Good. One of them.
Is that a theta?
It is.
Okay.
Just trying to act smart. Okay.
You did that yesterday. I did this yesterday. The circle's a lot bigger. It's like someone that was just nonplussed. Like,
We have a lot of thetas that already left too, so when I do that, they're like, oh, that's awesome. God's at work, the individual, okay?
is it the Bible?
Right, the Bible.
Yeah.
Bible and theology. It's kind of like a mix, okay? You know another one?
The church.
Church, good. Yeah. Demographics. Demographic. And then finally, what we're doing in here today, the learning process. Okay? Now, what we call TDOEE is some cases, okay? I'll explain what that is. Okay. Now, the reason I'm putting all this up here for you is because we're doing today is kind of a Q&A session, confusion in the POM. So I kind of want to take what we talked about yesterday and as well as what we have up here today and kind of say, what you got? What kind of questions do you have? What kind of doing questions? How does this play, make its way out? Hopefully you did a little bit of your homework of thinking about what kind of questions you had from yesterday. So feel free to jump in. Anything from yesterday you want to pick up on. We can work through these if you want. But, yeah.
You mentioned yesterday that you're having to relearn your love of the Word. Currently, can you explain what that process looks like?
You talking about me personally? Yeah, I mean, over and over, when I say relearn my love for the Word, really goes back to what I was saying about, am I going to the Bible for preparation for someone else? Or am I being prepared by my own memory, right? So in ministry, it's easy to slip into a place of, I've got to go study Romans, because right now I'm doing a senior Bible study, right? On Romans 5 through 8. Am I going there 5 through 8 and really just kind of getting this ready? What do I teach about this to them? How does this apply to them? How is it focusing there? Or am I going to the Word and relearning again? How do I study this for me? How do I take time? And so one of the things that I do practically is right now I'm going through Romans as a book and simply praying and meditating through the book. So how, not just 5 through 8, but how do I walk through Romans and relearn again as I'm a person growing in Christ? my love for the Word. So relearning that is not just hey, 8 years later, it's like a constant, right? It's a constant process. Going back to it. So, does that make sense? Good question.
Yeah. So as you talk about evangelism, mission, flushing service, I really appreciate what you said about, especially your students who look to you in your friendship relationships, of how to live life amongst non-believers. How do you do that? Maybe philosophically, maybe just you personally. How do you build systems in your own life so that you're not just continually feeding the machine of ministry? So like right now, I work full-time in the seminary, Susan works full-time in our church. We're already gone 3 nights a week with other committee meetings and Bible studies and like ministry stuff. And then we look up and we realize all of our lives are Christians around us. How do you build those things into what we do?
That's an awesome question. Well, before I answer that, does anybody kind of do that? Does anybody struggle with the same thing, but kind of like think about how you do that? How would you answer it? Yeah, what kind of thing? Is it similar?
Yeah. We definitely we have 3 little kids, and so we value family time at night. It's all the time Ian's like, man, you're gone, every night of the week. And so it's just something that we talk about, but it's something that we've tried to be disciplined to say, it's only going to be 3 nights a week, and the other nights we're going to do this. And we try really hard to have date nights once a week. It doesn't happen once a week, but that's our goal, So we try hard to make that happen.
What other ways do you really think about getting outside of the ministry machine, as you call it? And thinking, I guess you're specifically talking about evangelism missions, building relationships with those who may not be Christians, or taking time to do things for your own soul as a part of the kingdom. How would y'all do it?
That's hard. I like hanging out with Christians. It's hard to that's something that I've personally been really convicted about. I took a class on church planning this past Jan term, and it's one thing that our professor talked about a lot. He called it having a fishing pool, or he's like, what's your fishing pool? And he kind of described it as like, he has lots of friends, pastor friends. It's kind of like whatever their passion is, whatever they like. So like whether the golf course is their fishing pool, which is it's a pretty nice fishing pool to have, or like go fishing or the gym or whatever it might be. And so I've tried to start thinking about, I haven't really acted on this very well yet, but haven't really had a chance, but what's stuff that I enjoy doing. So like I play disc golf a lot. I love to play frisbee golf, playing tournaments and just get to know people that way. And I haven't viewed that as my fishing pond, but I probably should. So I guess maybe it's like thinking of, it's not as practical, but I think what my professor would say, just think about what's something that you love to do that other people who aren't Christians love to do, and just get to know them through that, I guess.
John is using some language that we use actually often in our PLM. Is what are the fishing pools that you're a part of? What are the places that you're connected to that you may not even think about? It could be disc golf. It could be I don't know, how you connected to a specific restaurant you go to, you visit often, or a coffee shop you meet at. Like the relationships. So you have fishing pools of work, or obviously one is church, right? So who's coming? But then, what are the other places?
Your kids are probably, your kids' friends are probably play sports or video plays.
Family extensions, right? So how do you think about, and the other part of that, another word we use in philosophy ministry is called meta-thinking. I don't know if they've said this a lot. It's why we do what we do, right? And I think, I cannot stress this to y'all enough, that, again, this type of seminar is for you to push you into forced reflection, to really think about what are my fishing. Why do I think the way I think? Because I think you're asking the right question. As I even think about that, myself, well, how do I see I love mingling with non-Christians. I think some of that's just, coming from a certain background and enjoying that. My wife, what she does, she primarily sees non-Christians. She does not hold her shingle out as a therapist, as a Christian therapist. So she sings to people all over the place. Now, I don't necessarily, that's not my fishing pool, because obviously confidentiality and stuff like that. But, those kind of things of, okay, how do we, we have connections in the music industry because of a former intern, getting to meet musicians and doing those kinds of things, spending time in, there are places around Vanderbilt that I go frequently. And I've gotten to know the people behind them, so much so that, we talk and they're like, hey, did you bring your son? Like the restaurant owners, or, things like that where we're really reaching out into a place of, hey, I've gotten to know this couple and our neighbors. We're not really good even thinking about our neighbors. And I've been really convicted of that, even with I think they're Christians, neighbors from where we used to live. They were awesome. Like, I didn't even know if they were Christians, and they were just reaching out. I was thinking, how come I'm just terrible at not reaching next door and talking to the people next door to me? So, just thinking about why we think the way we think and reaching out. With our kids, now that Jake is in kind of a Mother's Day Out program, we're meeting all these couples in different ways and talking to them, and it's kind of like, it may be a Christian school that's doing it, or a church that's kind of putting it on, but not everybody is a Christian. So, I don't know if that helps.
Two things. I don't know about everyone else, but the pools for me are pretty interwoven, kind of like the Olympics. So my first question to you and everyone else would be like, is that bad? I'm not saying that we should necessarily segment our life. Obviously, there's going to be people in the work pool and in the church pool, but is it wiser to segregate? To kind of have a little more of a segmented life in some ways? But that's my first question. But is coming to what Ken was talking about. I'm a huge creature of habit, and I grew up in a ministry family that did not model very well for me rest. That did not model for me date nights. And so my story kind of is playing majorly into just like ministry's life. I'm always doing it. I'm never not doing it. And I think that's very, very healthy. And so I wouldn't have known that. I have a mentor who is always thinking about rest. He's an elder in our church, and he's really challenging me. And I've only been under him for 2 years now, and I'm just now buying into what he's talking about. But for me, I think the big thing is surrounding yourself with older men and women who are not just teaching it, they're like literally practicing it. And I want to show that to you, because it's not until you see it, like we talked about, like seeing people and say like, wow, I want that, until you really know how do you do it. You need someone to mentor you. You need someone to decide you.
I think one thing that's prescriptive for us is, I just remember being in seminary, and if your fishing pools are like even more tightly wound than the Olympic rings, like if they look like a Venn diagram where the two circles are almost on top of each other, then your opportunity to evangelize is going to be diminished. And like even Paul was attempting, you know what I mean? Even Paul did something besides preach the word. People had occupation. So when I hear about like John playing, when I was in Tupelo, I was on my ultimate team, and there was one guy from my church on the team, and the other people were lost as the days long. You wouldn't think of Mississippi. They were just going through all kinds of awful things, but this guy that was a deacon and myself were on this team, and the opportunities that we had to kind of talk about the gospel to people who were not thinking in any kind of gospel categories. One, you would think, oh, well, we were such a blessing to them. Well, that's the arrogant way of thinking about it. Two, aren't you glad that I'm on your ultimate team? So I can turn it over all the time and but like how we were stretched, how this deacon and I were stretched
let us put our playground in his backyard. He knows our boys. We have an African American family diagonal to us as well, and he's a big Redskins fan. I'm a Redskins fan, so we have a relationship. So just investing in Laura a couple years, probably a year and a half ago, she invited the ladies over, all these ladies from the houses, to have tea one afternoon at her house. So God has put us in a situation to really, and it's right there around us so often. We're so involved in our church and our own circles, it's just, we miss that. And our boys get a public school also. And Laura's really involved with, she's a RYM mom, and she goes up and reads and eats lunch with boys that I do when I can. And the teachers are just blown away because so often that we're so involved. Yeah, it's just not the common thing, but just really taking advantage of those opportunities that the Lord presents, because it is easy to be. It's just hard to step out of your comfort zone so often.
Yeah.
But the Lord, He blesses you. You just got to open your eyes. You can't see the forest through the trees sometimes. So.
Well, it brings me to the thought too, is how much do we often pray for that, right? I mean, Ed Clowney, I don't feel like Ed Clowney is famous man who passed away a few years ago. He was president of Westminster Seminary, and I was able to have him not only as a professor, but work on the staff with him for about 6 months. And he was just a brilliant mind. He would say such simple things. He'd say, well, we talk often about reaching and doing evangelism, but should we actually pray for God to actually make those opportunities happen? That's what we see in the scriptures too, right? Not just, and for us to be aware of it. And it's funny for us too, right? Because if we're doing ministry, especially as an ordained pastor, I'm sitting on a plane and somebody next to me says, "What do you do?" Well, you tell them, and oftentimes they shut down. Like there are moments I'm like, I do a progression of, I work at Vanderbilt. What do you do, Vanderbilt? I'm a chaplain. I'm like, oh, really? What's that mean? And then I kind of go into it. There's like a little, but it's interesting how people react to that. Still, right? Whether you're and it doesn't matter whether you're in the South or the North. How do we pray for those opportunities when we see that? How do we?
We got a handle on that, don't we? I was Richard Pratt, our Presbyterian, really addressed this. Actually, the day of examination for ordination, he challenged ministers who were basically going into the ministry, and the thing that they were concerned about is, what is their package? Like, let me have my comfortable job and, theologize with my Christians. But he said, what if our men who are being ordained, instead of giving them comfortable packages, we said, consider yourself a church planter, and you establish your own church. And let's not be so free to just give positions to people, but let them recognize their primary job is to evangelize and disciple and to try to find those church plants. So let them start out being tent makers, get a job at Starbucks, or make their neighborhood their church. And I'm really challenged by that, and I feel like in large part in ministry we don't have that. We do not have a church planting mindset. We have a keep our people happy mindset, keep them fed, keep them cloistered. It's scary.
Right. Other thoughts about that or any other parts of this? Hopefully that's helpful.
No, that's really good. I have a follow-up question, if I can just ask everybody. To Jonathan's comment earlier, I'm curious, how many of y'all would say you have somebody who's actively mentoring you? 1, 2, 3, 4.
That's huge. That's a great question. How many of you have raised your hand? That's very powerful. That's a really good question. What made you ask that?
I'm just curious. So, in a room full of people who are on staff at churches who are called to mentor people, I'm wondering how much are we seeing that ourselves? What's our example of that, and how are we? When you talk to an earlier question of how do you build in, your own worship and growth and grace in terms of not, pursuing time in the Word and things, but also, how do we So I guess two questions. One, how do we better pursue that, being mentored by people? And two, how do we make it so that the people that we are ministering to aren't able to say that in RYM youth leader training of 10 years from now?
Yeah, and this is highly important. Because if you're the kind of person, maybe you have that now, maybe you need to evaluate how does that look? What does that look like? You know, maybe you have something that means with you. But I'll say, in what I do with my interns, that I take our internship very seriously. And not because I want my minions, which I call them that. I fire them every week, just for fun. But the REF internship program is, I don't know if you know about it, but essentially it's students that graduate, or recent graduates that are placed on certain campuses. I have two, a male and a female intern. And I love that program. And because I meet with them, we have staff meeting every week, and I meet with them individually, both, every week. And that is for me to give to them. And I specifically say, when we get together in this meeting, we can talk about one-on-ones with students when I meet with them individually. But this is a time for you to really have. And for some students, it's been really interesting because some are more prone to that. Some are like, well, you want to know me? You know, that they don't get that. There's something about really giving to them. And when I do that, it's not a how you doing? It's not a catch up. It's where are we growing? You know, let's talk about your life. And I'm modeling. Here's what we're doing: the learning process with them too. Because what I'm doing is I'm walking with them and teaching them. This is the mentoring kind of discipling thing, right? As I do that, they're learning. Oh, this is how I do it one-on-one, right? I bet most of you that are here that are being mentored, the person that's doing that with you was mentored as well. Because it's really something passed down. And so my question for all of you that I think, what is your name again? Kent is raising, it's beautiful, is are you seeking that? And then if you are in a relationship with them, what kind of relationship is with that person who's mentoring you? Are they giving to you in a way? Are you kind of asking for them, asking of that relationship? Or is it just a checkup? Because I think there's a huge process to this, right? In our churches, we do a lot of evaluations and stuff. But how much are we really learning the learning process and learning, the principles even in and of themselves in that time with that person? I tell my students and I tell my interns, I have people that I seek out. I meet with, who happens to be the chairman of our REF committee, but a pastor in town every single week, just for us to be encouraged, for me to be encouraged, and it's beautiful because he treats me often like a peer, but I feel as though I gain a lot more from him. And now we're at a church now. I've gotten to know the pastor very well. He has sought me out in amazing ways. So that's been overwhelming to me. It's really good. Great question. I don't know if that answers what you're saying, or if you were just asking or making a statement.
No.
Other questions about the POM or confusion or what we talked about yesterday or even this?
Stacey, I have a question that I'd like to open up. I think other churches are probably seeing, I've talked with several, a dynamic. In one regard, I want to see how it also manifests itself once kids move beyond high school into college. But you're seeing this vast growing number of homeschoolers versus high schoolers. And what we
kind of have to go, well, how perfect is our group really? But I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's a good question.
Just recently, we've come to the realization that our youth group pretty much hate each other. Like,
We've known that.
and
What church are you?
They use it very loosely, but when they come, and I think it's because we have D groups, and so when they come to Sunday school or they come to our Sunday night fellowship, they kind of go straight to their D group. And there's kind of this line, which is bittersweet because it's like, wow, they love their D group. But we've created a monster where they're not like, and so when you said just don't show up, there's something there, and just don't show up. That's one thing that Susan and I were talking about. We were kind of mentioning like, well, that would be really, really cool. So that's one idea. Just don't show up. Just stick them in a room together and see what happens. I don't know.
Figure it out.
But yeah, but another
That's what we call in youth terms locking.
I think there's a book about that called Lord of the Flies. It doesn't work out well with the homeschool kids. But as far as the school, we have a lot. We have a huge Christian school contingency, a public school, and a few homeschoolers. And I mean, it really is. If they have interest with each other, then they may get along. But it really is very segmented. And I've only been at this church 2 years, and I'm just now realizing the massiveness of this. But in my mind, it really starts with the elders and it starts with the parents. And I think that for one, we put a lot of that pressure on ourselves. But we're not going home with these kids and telling them, hey, consider your Christian brothers and sisters, not just your classmates. We don't have that type of authority over them. So what can we do? In my mind, we can model for them. I have a few leaders who kind of do a leader buddying up. And I just say, like, model in front of your kids. Take kids out on one-on-ones or one-on-twos or one-on-threes with kids from other schools or other homeschool groups. Like, create the awkwardness. And do it so often to where it's not awkward anymore. That's a practical thing. But in my mind, it's sitting down with parents and saying, how are you encouraging or creating a scenario where your kids can be all things to all people? And the problem is most of the parents, most of our parents, they're not wrestling with that themselves. They don't see it as a problem. Like, they should love the kids at their school because they're with them all the time. They don't need to be thinking about the kids at church. So we're wrestling with that. And that's something that I'm continuing to realize that the answer really is the Spirit. And that's so, like, we're starting to pray, like, we need a revival in this youth group to really see change. And so that's not an easy answer to chew on, but in my mind, it's like the Holy Spirit pretty much needs to break some hearts before we ever see that. I don't know if that.
Just to piggyback, I think you're exactly right, Jonathan. It's the Holy Spirit. I think it's just time.
Yeah.
I think it just takes time, like, to build relationships with kids who don't know. Our church, we have, we're a city church that kind of draws from all over the place. We have 50 schools in our student ministry. And so, none of our kids know each other. It's like a 2-to-1 school to kid ratio, or kid to school ratio. And so, it's like, we have homeschool kids, we have everything, but it just I feel like and so it's hard for us to have like good community in our student ministry, and the Spirit is being good, the guys are being good to like give us glimpses of that, but when those glimpses happen, it's just from it's like what you said, like it's just time and slow investments of like leaders taking kids from kind of different areas of life and making them intersect for a little while and giving them time together. But yeah, to me, it's like a time and prayer thing.
Oh yeah, jump in.
Yeah, just want to add to what Kay said, because this is an issue that we've dealt with. I've been at our church 6.5 years, and same demographic that you mentioned over there, big Christian school, public school, homeschool. And when I first got there, it took me about 6 months to a year to notice that the new covenant spirit moving absolutely is the key factor. And the big turning point, I would say, for us, we haven't arrived by any means. It's always going to be an issue, but just be on top of it. But a big turning point was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. A mother from the public school and a mother from the private Christian school, they started a prayer group for that very reason, to pray about this issue. So on Wednesday nights, the kids would come. They would do prayer requests, but mainly they're praying for the big issue of school. So while I'm teaching, and we're having our small group time after teaching, there's a group of parents now, been going on for 3 or 4 years, that are praying for our students, praying for the unity issue, that it happens. And God has done some amazing things. And the inner circle is so important too. The core group of students, of 8 students on the leadership team, high school students, 10 through 12, homeschool, public school, and the private Christian school, but challenging them to be leaders, set the example for the other students. I stole it from the Sustainable Youth Ministry book, but the motto is, we feel awkward so you don't have to. And we get together and we put our hands in the middle and we say awkward, and they've embraced it, and they're assigned, in our youth house, they're assigned to different positions, to reach out and to build relationships, and so they're setting the model, they're setting the example, and having kids from the Christian school going to sporting events. I took taking guys from the Christian school to a basketball game with the public school that some of the public school kids play on. Just stuff like that. Public school kids going to eat lunch if they don't have school, going to eat lunch during the Christian school lunch hour, and doing that together, those type of things.
So what I'm hearing from y'all, which is fantastic, is kind of twofold. One is, how are you equipping your leaders to do this? I don't know if you read this article. It's a famous one by C.S. Lewis called The Inner Ring. If you haven't, you need to read it. Write it down, read it. I make my leaders read it every year. Because Lewis hits to the inner ring is the invisible circles that we create in order to find and make community and keep others out. And it's fantastic the way he writes it, obviously. He's an okay writer. So, and I make them read that, and I'm equipping. What I'm doing is when I look at my leaders, I think this is one of the things you're saying. I look at my leaders and I say, who makes up my leaders? I have a ton of Memphis students, I have a ton of Birmingham students, I have a ton of Texas students. How many of them are independent? How many of them are Greek? How many of them are in sports? And that's what we call demographics. Okay, do you know the demographics of your leadership? What makes it up? And for y'all, you have a little different nuance. You have parents, so you need to ask 2 questions here. You need to ask, okay, how am I equipping the demographic of the type of parents I have and of the leaders I have? And what the makeup of my students. And I think the second thing is, and this is why I wrote City Campus Ministry, the RUF in New York City is much like what some of y'all described. And this is more of the practical, how do you implement this? They do a thing up there, which is really Michael Keller, Tim Keller's son, perhaps you heard him. He's an RUF campus minister, great guy, went to Vanderbilt years ago. For a while, we tried to do RUF in New York in the same way we do it everywhere. Let's go to NYU, let's have one here, and it just wasn't working. Why? Because there are over 80 different universities in New York, right? So what Michael thought brilliantly, and I don't know how many people he had in on this, but he thought, how do we just do something that's campus-wide? Because instead of looking at the campus, people go, what do students move to New York for? Not for their campus, but for what? The city, right? How do we make this a city-wide deal? So what he does, we took a group of our students up there, we do a mission, we've done we call it a vision trip. We go up to New York, kind of partner with Redeemer for a week and do what we call learn, serve, enjoy the city. And our students go and they learn about how does ministry happen in the city. We'll get people teach us, we'll go to church there, serve. We got to go to RUF, one of the RUF functions, they call it Sunday Conversations. And this is what I thought was really awesome. They meet right after church, and it's for any students to go. And all they're encourage all their, and they have pizza, and they just have a topic. And what they'll do is it's right after church, and so there'll be students that aren't necessarily, so they're like NYU, Columbia, I mean, we're talking everywhere. And they sit in kind of a little theater that go after whatever the service is. And Michael and his other staff member will kind of start what's the conversation. Today we're talking about suffering. Here's a sheet, give you a little, and wherever you're sitting, turn and speak to the people next to you. We're going to talk about, this, and then you turn back, and then you have this big dialogue. It's great. It draws in the people who aren't Christian. It draws in the people that are. It begins to connect people, and he requires the people that are in RUF that come regularly to bring someone, right? Well, what if we were to apply, and I think that what's beautiful about that is it's something laid back that's already there. What if you were to apply, I just thought of this as you were talking about the parent. What if you applied that to parents? Breaking that model. What if you said, we're going to have Sunday conversation, I don't know, every other month. And you have your parents come to a dialogue about kids' issues. And you said, if your kid's in this ministry, you need to be here.
Right.
And you just said something of the effect of, here's our topic today. You talk about a topic of adolescence and technology. I don't know. So just some sort of thing. You give them a sheet. You make them turn in the small group wherever they are. You make them turn around and start asking questions. And they have to be in a room to dialogue. What if you did that with your parents? That'd be a pretty cool thing. I think that would unite some parents. I think it would force them in a room. I think you could also do that with your students. Okay, obviously you could do that with students. I think you could do that with them. I used to do a thing when I was in Houston. When I was in Houston, we didn't have any, all the kids were like this tall, right? And so it was a plant church, and so I was going cold turkey to high school and stuff. Talk about having to deal with insecurity issues. So I was going to demographics of some schools where they are literally flushing drugs down the toilet when I'm walking in, to private schools where they all are this is before this is years ago. They were using laptops already, connected to Wi-Fi. They were doing all their homework online. This is long before iPads and stuff like that. I mean, we're talking very vast, different kind of places. And I had to learn, how do I go and take a private school kid from Episcopal High School and a kind of a quasi, person that thinks I'm a narc from Bel Air, right? And how do I meet them? So I would do these things called coffee house times. And I'd just say, hey, Thursday afternoon, we're going to meet at a coffee house if you want to come. Just an open time to ask questions. We can have coffee and hang out. And there weren't 50 students that came. There were usually 8, but it mixed people. People would sometimes come. They were like, hey, you got to, oh yeah. They knew each other, but they didn't know each other. But what you're doing is you're beginning to take, say there's a group here, an individual here, maybe a group here that's non-Christian grouped. You may have seen this model. A Christian group, a non-grouped non-Christian here, and a non-grouped Christian. Right? There's 4 categories. And you begin to kind of do this, right? And you begin to, or demographically, if you put them in that group, or demographically, you have what we would say in RUF, we have some independents or Greeks or whatever they call it. Those are usually the 2 bigger ones. But homeschool, private school, know your demographic. Think about what works well. This is just an idea that may work, may not for you. Right? You may have tons of students from you may be from, in Montgomery. Where is my Montgomery crowd? We're joking. Oh, there. Y'all may have mostly similar. I don't know if they go to one school or what Montgomery's like there, but you may have. I've had a few students from Montgomery. Okay, so they come from similar schools. So I don't know if there's a streamline. You got to think about that. What's your demographic? What works well, and how do you work? Y'all have the parent, linchpin there, which is a little different from what I have to work.
I think one thing about that parent linchpin that you have to remember, parents, this is before I was in Montgomery where this problem is just exacerbated, but even in Tupelo, we have this problem. Parents are extremely insecure about all the things you're insecure about, but the one thing that they're very insecure about is what choice they've made about how they're going to educate their child.
Absolutely.
That is the thing that is just laying their soul bare to even think to criticize homeschooling or public schooling or private Christian schooling or private non-Christian schooling, to even think to criticize that in any way, whether intended or
gospel-driven church that breaks the mold of what this is supposed to be, how do I actually encourage them and pastor to them? Not tell them how to run their kids in school and education, but say, do you idolize where you put your kids in? In Nashville, it's huge too, right? I mean, people in Nashville, it's like rushing a fraternity or sorority to get your kids in a specific school. And I'll tell you, and I'm not saying Texas had it right, but I went to public school as well, and there are a little more bigger public school areas. When I moved to the Southeast, and y'all know this from if you went to Jackson or near there, I mean, the private school thing in the Southeast, it ups the ante, it seems like, and the homeschool thing. At least when I was going through school. But I found myself, even in Nashville, when I was teaching a Sunday school class in a church that had tons of parents. It was all parents. I kept kind of going, this is what they, you're right, this is what they worship. I mean, and how am I bold enough to say it, but love them in it and say, I understand it, but you got to know, is this what we want our church to be?
And then it's transferred to their children.
Exactly.
That's the thing, exactly. Because
You hit it from both sides.
Yeah.
Don't triangulate, but hit them both. Do you see what I'm saying?
Because kids are often just repeating what they're hearing at home from their parents.
Right.
Yeah. I think another key factor too is just it's been helpful having, if you have a senior pastor, associate pastor. You know, our senior pastor recently, a sermon in October, he in his sermon he addressed the school issue.
Good.
As far as comparison, and hearing it from the pulpit from your senior pastor for parents, I mean, that's a huge deal. It's very helpful. Spirit uses that.
Let me say this one thing and then jump in. With that, how many of you have parents too that if you did this kind of thing, a Sunday conversation, instead of you being up front doing the conversation, would have a parent up front convicting other parents? I'll tell you what, that's been awesome. That's when you know you have equipped some of your parents, not just your students, to be up front to buy into this, so that you're not the one making the comments of, well, y'all worship schools, you worship where they're educated. They're standing out there going, let me tell you how I worship this kind of thing with my kids. Let me encourage you as my friends and people I go to church with. How do we change this? You know what I mean? And if you find those parents, you better believe you better use them for that. You better be meeting with them. You better be teaching. And then, what if you even did this with your parents? Talk about the inner ring. I mean, I don't know if y'all have some sort of leadership thing with parents. I don't know. You may have. I couldn't highly recommend that enough. Yeah, you go on, Joe.
So one thing that we have noticed years ago, that both involved with women's ministries as well as high school, is that the women in the church who were homeschooling began dropping out of women's Bible study. And so,
Dropping out?
right, they weren't attending the women's Bible study anymore because they were homeschooling. So we had that for several years and we were trying
Is that just because of time, or was that?
It was kind of like, yeah, I don't have time to do that. That was maybe what we heard, the kids need to have that time to do their studies. There's different factors that they cited. But it began to be a very obvious action, that was taking place. So we, just this past year, started getting to the size where we can incorporate the homeschooling class for the kids during Bible study time. So these women, and I didn't expect them to come, because they were still, they'd been so adamant about not doing this, but years, started just pouring in Bible study. And so now their kids are in a homeschool class, and really it's just an independent study. There's an adult in there who just make sure they're doing their studies. And these women are now meeting with the other women at the church, and where they have them. So that's starting there with the women. These kids are younger, but because we've seen that faction among the students and among the kids. And then that's the second thing I was going to say is you do need to have these parents on your leadership team. So often the youth leaders are younger, they have little kids, or they don't have kids yet, and they're fighting this, what they're seeing their parents do to their kids. But we also need to be, it's very helpful to have parents on the leadership team. But just bringing those women together, they've seen a big difference since, and been for the year.
That's great.
And we're seeing, that's a good, you do have a good point,
Yeah. No, that's fantastic.
are your sessions, do they know this issue goes on? And how is your, is your session engaged? Because I think on the parent side, that if they're shepherding those families, and oftentimes we talk about in our session, meetings as well, is that, you literally, these families are taking a vow and trying to help them understand what that vow is and the peace and purity of the church. And so it makes me wonder if y'all are in your reports, or if you're, are you making this a point that, because this is part of that fissure, that dividing line that can be within the church, that we want kids to learn to love each other, and if they're shying away from their peer group, or if there's a lot of things that go on, that, and going back to even mentoring, are you getting mentored by your session on how to, to love these kids? It just makes me think along those lines.
Yeah, and then it's fellowship and service right there. I mean, how do you see the fellowship and service from session down, and even from the bottom up? Fellowship and service isn't like the service we think of, like serving for a week. Service is getting into one another's lives and serving. Right? So that's a great question. I think session is a huge part of that. Huge part.
Do you ever feel, this doesn't sound very spiritual, and you'll rebuke me later, but
Get out.
I feel sometimes like I might be expecting a lot more of my students than they're actually spiritually capable of. And like we talk a lot. I want my group to be united with all of the crazy school options, but and I want it to flow from the parents. And I think there's a lot of merit there, but I feel like my expectations are maybe too high, and that I'm not in accord with the already and not yet. Maybe I'm just expecting too much.
No, I think that's a great point. And I hope you don't mind me saying this. I was talking to Joe and John here last night after our session, because I think somebody else brought this up about you deal with students that in immaturity, that you kind of go, how do you expect more from, have you all read Hurt by Chap Clark? Have you ever read that? Okay, if you haven't, another book you need to read is there. I'll just give you it's a great book, and essentially his point is this. He's saying we put, I'm putting a different language on it, probably more therapeutic language. We parentify kids very quickly in our culture. And a lot of times what that does is, in putting expectations on them, and I think oftentimes, youth ministry is a funny place because you do goofy things, and you people kind of expect a goofy thing. But how much do you allow them to be kids? And even in moments when you expect them. And I think you bring up an awesome point, because there's sometimes with students, I work with a million things to pop in my head at once. So it was like double click on a file in my brain and let's fall down here. I'm working with 18 to 22-year-olds, right? And because their parents aren't around, there are moments that I'm like, why is this? I get so upset. And Megan will look at me and go, Stacey, they're in college. You know what I mean? And she's so right. And there are oftentimes I go, I need to kind of let them be a student. And I need to let them, we need to let them be kids at moments and be wise about how are we training them up. Because they were asking me this after the whole, how do we when Jesus says, I was talking about children, teaching them to be children when I teach at Alpine, the whole illustration. There's something huge to that. Letting them be kids at times, and also knowing when to teach them to grow up, but letting them be children, and walking with them as children, not expected. So I don't have a perfect illustration for that, but I think that's a wisdom vision that we need to pray about. And I think it's a great question. I don't know, maybe y'all have thoughts about that? Yeah.
I think about this a lot, and I struggle with it too, because I feel like I'm the same way. Really expecting a lot of these students, and then realizing and then when you learn their stories about what's happening at home, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm the bully. come to churches because it gives them a happy feeling. We want them to have relationships with Jesus. And so when that happens, other things follow. And I think that's the biggest thing when you're discipling students. For me, I realize the ones that I'm like, wow, like you've become my friend is when they start teaching me about Jesus. And it's those hard questions that I put on them early on, that's what people do for me. I think about my disciplers and my mentors growing up. They weren't the ones that like said, let's go play ultimate and never asked me a tough question or never said, how are things going with your parents? Or never. They were the ones that were like, hey, can you give me the gospel presentation? Or, hey, can you tell me how you know you're saved? What if you meet a homeless man? What are you going to tell them? Like, and so they didn't always just expect me to answer them. But they also didn't give me those answers. It really helped me get there. And so as I think about discipleship, like that's this like teacher, mentor, disciple, or disciple-e process. It's a process.
That is a beautiful point. Did you hear what he just said? The last thing he said, too, as you cap that off, is really well put. Because what you're saying, and just put it in different languages, is how do we let them own their own feelings, not make them where we are, but be where they are, and let them own their feelings, grow in their feelings, grow in their life in decisions and wisdom, so that they grow up in earnest, right? And that's really well put.
I think what you were saying reminded me of being at camp. I worked at Outline, and about how one of the things they kept saying to us was, this has to be a place where it's safe for them to fail.
Yeah.
Where it's safe for them to fail. And so all this discussion about like, are we expecting too much? Yes, we are. But should we have high expectations? Yes, and all these things. But like, I think for me, one place where I fail constantly is that, and it's because I idolize being right. I've got a pretty good streak going since '86, so it's the last time.
I remember getting in just goofy arguments with you.
Yeah.
You won a few times.
Yeah, but anyway. No, I think for me personally, like, I don't ever want to be wrong. And like, or I don't ever want to like not know. I always want to know the answer. Like life is Jeopardy or something. And so anyway, but that can leak out to your kids where they're scared to give you a wrong answer. So you can say to them, where you say to them, I was thinking about like some of my students like saying like, you give a gospel presentation, and like them being afraid to say no, that they can't. It's okay that they can't. I mean, it is and it isn't. We want them to get to a point where they can, articulate the gospel and pray in front of people and all this kind of things. But we can also foster an environment, if we're not careful, where you only get praise when you have the right answer. In fact, I think that's where they live right now, is because of school and all these different things, is like where you get praise is having that right answer. And they're scared to fail, so they don't ever learn. They just try to, anyway.
Absolutely.
Just that, anyway.
I think you'll get falsified answers too. I mean, you'll get very Jesus is the answer for everything, or very fronted answers. They won't be what they actually feel and
Yeah, they pray the typical teenager prayer, which is like just the word just over and over again. Lord, just give us a good day, just because they're trying to think what did the pastor say when they pray? Instead of like when you pray from like our pastor said, if you don't know how to pray, just take a chair, like this empty chair, and sit down in front of you, and then act like you're talking to God. Act like he's sitting right there, and that's how you talk to him. And if you pray like that, then your students, your children, that's how they'll pray too. Like it's a real relationship, and not just like some words you're trying to impress people with. Right?
Yeah. But by the way, our time's up. I don't know what y'all have next, so I want to be respectful of that. What do y'all have next? We can keep talking for a minute if you have some more questions, but I don't want to get you late for something. Since I already have a streak of that. So.
It says that we have 30 minutes.
Do what?
It says 10:45 on the schedule.
Oh, we have till 10:45?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, I didn't know that. I thought it was this morning. Oh, I'm just sick of it. No. No, but that's fantastic. Yeah.
Can I bring up a question for everybody? Something we've been trying to wrestle through is how much we've seen the culture of the world, but of our youth group, of our church change in the last 5 years. And I know it's changed more than that. But maybe the last 5 minutes, again, last 5 years of commitment. And so what does that mean for our youth group? It's like, at our church, we started there 5 years ago, and so we said, hey, we're going to do this thing once a month, and everybody would come, because that was the only thing they had going on, or whatever. When I was in the youth group, it was like, I didn't have anything going on, so Wednesday night I definitely was there, you know? Or if they planned something, I'd go. And now everybody has every other option in the world for friendship, for relationships and community through, you know, social media, but then also there's a chance that something else might go on. Like we were talking to somebody else this morning, like Krishan, like I asked this guy, hey, we're going to help students move on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. Can you come? He goes, well, I don't know. This is Thursday. And I said, well, what are you doing Saturday? He said, nothing. I'm like, well, then you can come. He said, well, no, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, well, you're not doing anything. Come, you know? And he's like, well, I don't decide till Friday night. And I was like, you just admitted that, you know? Like, can't you say yes, you know? And the same Hooters guy.
Make sure sure you watch my feet. And he throws it, and everyone does this. Like, why, like 79 heads, like everyone's heads turn and watch the disc. And he's like, all right, who saw my feet? And everyone's like, He's like, that's the problem, is that we're in disc golf, and I think this is true in ministry too, we're too results driven. And what he was saying, like, he's like, what you're going to do is you're going to leave this, you're going to try this footwork thing I just showed you, and you're going to suck for a while, because it's not how you usually do your footwork. And so you're going to throw terribly, and you're going to be like, well, that doesn't work because I'm not throwing well, because I'm not getting the results that I want. But his point is, like, if you're doing things the right way, the results are going to come. Like, if your fundamentals are right, then that's really all you can do. And I think that's what this is. This, like, us remembering what our fundamentals are. And in some ways, results are still important. Like, we don't want to run a student ministry with where 0 kids come. But I think too, like, to kind of piggyback off Jonathan again, serving is like, it's a fundamental thing. Like, that's kind of like getting back to the basics of what we're called to do as believers, is to serve and love the world and people, and the community's built that way. And I don't know. I think that was a good, like, image for me to remember. Just stick to the basics, I guess.
You're saying that, taking a step back, we're in a very Facebook event culture, right? On a Facebook event, even if you say you're going, you divide that in half, and that's what you get. Like, we're doing our Super Bowl party this week. We got a Facebook event. We got our website. We got all that stuff. But I know I'm going to order the half the amount of pizza when I see this. Right? And there's a part of you that I think in us that needs to begin to embrace that side, and also underneath in the current of it. And I think that's what these guys are saying. In the current of it, change it. Go upstream from that. So if you go upstream from a culture that is this Facebook event culture, where I want, and I intentionally don't close registration for our fall conference until after. I know I didn't close it until after, because I know there are straggler students that will come, that I want to come, that will not come, the Hooters guys, that will come, right? I want that guy to come here, but under the current of that, I'm teaching them what? I'm teaching them, this is a place that you're going to find the richness of what you really want. This is a place I want you to know that you want to come to. Teaching them, following up with them, pursuing them. How do you teach them not to live as a Facebook event? But also leave room for those students that maybe what we would call on the fringe to say, man, I'm not doing anything Friday, I'll go to this. I have so many students that come to a Wednesday night RUF. And that's what I love. We have avenues of ministry, right? This isn't rocket science for all of us. It's large groups, small groups, one-on-ones, right? How's the door open on all of those avenues for you to have somebody come and go, right? Yeah, you want to build a team, but how do you show when they come that you say, this is what real community is, so that when you do, if you do, you can leave anytime. But you know what I'm saying? Like, you build it in there, but you're all the while you're teaching, this isn't really helping you. This is what the culture is. This is how it is. But you know what? I'd love for you to be here if you can make it. I deal with a culture of students that it's all about showing face. So everything. If they show face at an event for RUF, then I have students that'll come to something and then right after go to a frat party. You know what I'm saying? Like, so they'll come for an hour just so they can say they were there. But there's a part of me that's just so okay with that, because I want them to say, you know, and they'll say to me if they miss RUF, they'll go, Stacey, I'm so sorry. Sorry I haven't been able to be there at the class, or I haven't make it. And I'm like, dude, you don't need to tell me that. Like, I'm not here to check you off and make sure you're in this. If you want, I want you to be there. Yeah. I'm so glad you really want to be there. I put it back on there. I'm like, so glad you want to be there. You make it when you can. Sermons are podcasted. You know what I mean? Like, I want to encourage them that oh wow, like this is an inviting place. And then when I would meet with them one-on-one, how much, and then we kind of go to this issue, how much am I teaching them in the moment about changing that culture? So going upstream, does that make sense? Or floating, as I think Tim Keller said this when he came to our training. He said, you're floating an A doctrine on a B doctrine. So you're essentially floating community, the A doctrine of deep communion in the church, on maybe a B doctrine of, yeah, what do you think of, like, I don't know, it could be a million different things. An event, the topic of him going with his friends and New Year's, or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like you're kind of, you're floating that in there. Does that make sense? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think there was too much silence in the room. You said, "Do you guys know what I'm talking about?" Just like everyone in the service what you're talking about.
That may be too much I'm giving you, but I'm trying to think about. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just a question like, so when I hear your question to me is how do you start to undo the knot of self-service within students? The thought of like, I'm always going to hold my options open because I might want to do something more the day before, and similar to that is like, how do you guys start to address what I see to be like the self-service of families, which is to have their kids over-involved? So like that's, in your example, it's the kid deciding, helping someone move is not fun. I might get a better offer that morning to go out to lunch with somebody and that's going to be really fun, so I'm going to do that. Whereas like what Susan and I talk about a lot in our context is like seeing the families that have their kids basically sign up for stuff until 10 p.m. So like in order to actually hang out with a student, it's like, it's either 10 p.m. or it's like 7 a.m. breakfast, because everything in between, it's like 3 sports a year, and then it's, multiple societies or whatever. And it seems to be a lot of kids at Christian school, mostly, who are just, kind of like you said of the tenor of, the Vanderbilt community, of like, whatever I'm going to do, I gotta do all that. It's kind of like that, so I don't know, like, how do you guys start to get towards like the families, maybe idols, whatever, of having their kids over-involved in everything?
Yeah, I'll talk about that for a second. I'm going to run the restroom. Cool. Talk amongst yourselves.
Is there John Stone ploy?
I'm going to go through my notes real quick.
Start it and leave everyone.
He's texting Brian and he's like, it's crazy. Tell me what to say.
Have you all seen Race to Nowhere, the documentary? Race to Nowhere? We just got it. I haven't watched it yet, but apparently it's someone who's like not a Christian, but like observed what you just described, and made a documentary called Race to Nowhere, and it just kind of became available, I think, on DVD. But some churches in Houston had started to watch it, and I've heard some people tell me about it. It was really good. But this seems like a really recent phenomenon. Like I feel like most of us were in high school like fairly recently, and like it's totally different than it was when we were in high school. And so the documentary kind of gets at that, and that might be a helpful thing to. I haven't seen it yet, so
You're talking about kids being super busy, and I started to make a joke and decided not to. Well, we're not going to get into Vanderbilt, then I don't do all that stuff. I've been busy from. You went to me. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but like, my students, when I was in high school, I thought that I was being somewhat active because I was in like 2 clubs. Yeah. And now, like you're saying, now it's just like, well, I've got a key club meeting this week,
think that it's kind of just rushing by them.
Yeah.
You know, or by a lot of them. And I think that maybe part of our calling is to just help them see that. And, you know, hopefully we have senior pastors and maybe helping with sessions and helping them see what's going on. And because parents really, I mean, deep down, parents love their kids and they want what's best for them. And so I think our job is to remind them, like, this is actually what's really, really best for your kid. Like, there's no repercussion if a kid misses a sporting event or a club meeting, there's an immediate repercussion for them. If they miss youth group, there's zero repercussion for them. But there's actually probably, very, very likely, a way more long-term repercussion for kids who aren't bought into and invested in the community of the church. And I think our job is to help parents see that we're in like we're really in the investment business. I mean, it's a long, slow, that you don't see results very often, or big leaps. But it's a slow, just kind of sludge of an investment business that we're in. And I think our job is to bring that to life for parents.
Yeah, I do find it ironic, sorry, that like they won't respond about something like 2 days later, but if it's like a school event and they have to have it for sport, like they're on top.
It's a non-negotiable.
It's a non-negotiable, and that's, again, it's like helping them understand that, like where their priorities are, where their heart's at.
I taught in our class, in our church. I guess I'm new, so they just like give me some money. I think the pastoral staff thinks it's funny to give me stuff to do. They hate to do. And they're like, "You're gonna teach comedians this year." And I'm like, "I know." Or I'm like, "Oh, no big deal, whatever." So I have a parent meeting for comedians class, and all the parents' questions are not like, "Oh, you know, we're trying to decide whether your child is a Christian or not." This is what we're talking about. Like, you know, do they have their faith in Christ? And the questions are all like, "Now, are we going to have class the weekend of Martin Luther King?" Because these are the questions that we're getting. That's like the only weekend I really instill in my kids. You know, and at one point I just paused and I was like, this is the most important thing that your child does to his life to this point. This is the most important thing that he does, period. There's nothing more important. Nothing that he did, nothing. Whether he will be a member of the church or he or she will be a member of the church or whether they won't be, I can't think of anything that's more important. And it was so freeing to say that, like, to them. And they were all like, they were like, yeah, I mean, they can't really argue with it. It's like, no, if he doesn't make the junior varsity basketball team, that's way more.
You know what would be very interesting, and you just made me think of, is what if you, instead of necessarily teaching, and this is a very vulnerable thing to do, but to have a Sunday conversation with parents, that kind of facility, and ask one question: how do you view school? And just listen. Don't give answers. Don't do anything. Just take it all in. And seriously, and let them talk about it. And even if they put you on the spot and say, all right, what do you think? And you're like, you know, tonight, and even up front say, tonight I just kind of want us to share about what we think about this, because it helps me to get a sense of where your kids are. And this may be vulnerable for you. This is maybe something where you express, man, I really, and get them to own the fact, how much do they put into school or life, or your kid. You can put kids, right, instead of school. And I think, you know, I've done this for Andy students. What if you were to do some sort of seminars for your students? Like instead of going through a book of the Bible, take a, I don't know what y'all do on Sunday nights or when your thing is. Sunday morning, do your thing, or maybe even Sunday morning, do a couple seminars for a month on gospel and middle school life, and think and ask them to before you do it, have them write down the number one thing on a card, like 3 top things that grab your attention. What do you put most of your time into? I don't know, and really think about it, and give them a culture thing. These are the questions or the things that you've responded. How do you react to these? You know, like put it back on them, teach where they are, ask the questions. And when I did this for Andy students, it was very helpful. I did how do you study? And I even gave approaches to, like, little practical it really kind of makes them go, oh, you're actually thinking about this. You're not just telling us that we overwork them. You know? So I think there's some practicality to that. I think, and this is really good hearing y'all talk about this, because you're helping each other.
And to follow up on what Kim was talking about, and really what you said too, is that being busy isn't bad in this world. To us, I see how busy these kids are and it's exhausting. And I'm thinking, exhaustion, I'm exhausted, therefore that's bad. And I kind of project, like, why are you so busy all the time? But for them, it's normal. Like, for them to have a 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., that's not in place, then it's bad for them. So, and I'm thinking about how that happened, and I'm thinking about history, and thinking about who their parents are, and how a lot of their parents were very emotionally and even physically disconnected to their parents' generation, and how that probably created a culture in our parents' generation and our students' parents' generation to be busy, to find something to do. So that's how these kids are being raised. But the more I've talked to college students and kids, I say kids, I'm 27, but people who are out of college, I find that there's actually a return back to like they want to be lazy. They don't want to commit, and they're fighting against the way that their parents are raising them right now. And it's like a really, really bad cycle. And I like your question a lot. Like how do you view school? And I'd say a follow-up question then would be how do you view church? Right. Because that kind of would really open up the can. But as I see all this, like I think about our church and all the different things that we offer. Are we adding to the students and their families? Are we adding to their rest, or are we adding to their busyness as we see it? And I'm just thinking, like, how does a church help people rest? And that's another question I want you to think about. It's like, how are you helping your students rest? Because, like I said, I feel like I condemn them for being too busy. But instead of discipling them in that negative way, how about we disciple them in a positive and say, how can I help you rest? How can I help you rest? And so what we've done, for one example, one small way, and this is brand new to me, but one small way is this past semester, we had our Sunday night fellowship, and it was really pretty tightly structured and really intensely planned out. As we just said, hey, we're just going to have a meal, and maybe break into prayer groups or have someone from good attention. But come if you can, leave when you need, come early, come late, just come with friends, and but be with your families. Or if you have friends you don't get to see throughout the week because they go to different school or you don't cross paths, spend time with them. If you have a friend that's not a believer, you want to be with him or her. There it is. So just trying to say, hey, this is for your enjoyment, for your encouragement, and for our fellowship. But it's not mandatory. So trying to encourage them with that a little bit to say, hey, we want to help you in rest. And I still doubt that we're doing a very good job of it. Again, this is something we're still learning, but I feel like there's a difference between being busy and not being at rest. I feel like some of these kids do pretty well staying involved throughout the whole day, better than I do, and still being able to do it in a restful way. And so sometimes I'm learning from them, like, how are you always active but still at rest, still enjoying your relationships, enjoying your classes, enjoying your extracurricular stuff. So my mind needs to be a little bit readjusted for that.
Another resource for kind of what you're talking about, and this is getting a little deeper than anything now, but Maggie Jackson is a sociologist who's written some books on why we're exhausted, basically. And one of the things, and I learned about her through Marcel Audio Journal, Ken Myers stuff, great stuff. She says that in our culture, using the technology is not the beast, it's not the problem of our culture, right? It's us. But what we've used it for is to almost disembody ourselves in order to meet the needs of others or ourselves. So, in other words, right, that we are trying to make ourselves other than. And it kind of goes back to, in fact, glorification in a sense. Why we spend so much time texting this kind of. But what that gets to is we've gotten in a pattern in our lives, right, where we can go from one thing to the next, and it almost doesn't exhaust it; it exhilarates us. I get that. I totally understand that kind of. So how do we? And this is what I think is fascinating. Why does Jesus and then James afterwards spend time talking about the yes and no, right? There are two passages in the Bible that speak about New Testament. Let our yes be yes and our no be no. Is that not kind of a strange thing to you? I think it's really interesting. And I think that says exactly what you're talking about, is how do we learn what yes is and no is? My campus minister at Baylor said to me, he said, you really don't get the gospel until you're able to say no. Like, actually say no. You know, I think it's interesting even now when we say no to things. Oftentimes we're like, oh, I'd love to. Maybe I can do it later. We don't even say the word no. It's hard to even say it, right? Because we don't know how to do that. And when we say yes, it doesn't have our full attention. And so Maggie Jackson talks a lot about attention span as well, that we actually don't give ourselves fully to anything anymore because we're so multitasking as we herald it in our culture, actually detracts from our ability to give ourselves fully to someone or something. Because we're not fully directed to it. And so as much as and I'm a terrible multitasker, I'm not saying that and that's good. But I'm kind of like going, oh, and for so long I felt shame about that. I'm like, I can't do this. But I'm starting to learn, like, maybe that's good. You know, maybe I need to learn. And I'm already a person that wants to be, like, I'm like wanting to do so many things. So how does your yes hold weight, and how does your no as well? And I think it would be worth y'all going back and when I taught this, when I went through the Sermon on the Mount, such a good passage. Because when we say yes to things and we do so many things, what are the Pharisees wanting to do by keeping all the law? They're wanting to be limitless, right? And that's why we busy ourselves. We want to be limitless. And that's exactly the culture, what bubbles up from the students. When they don't want to come, they don't want to give you a commitment. They want to be limitless, right? How do we teach them and know ourselves that being limited is not just a good thing, but a beautiful thing? And that we embrace it. That we love our limits. That we embrace we live out of our limitations. And that because of that, it's a great thing. Even when we say yes, we live out of our limitations, right? So loving your limits, and the Pharisees are trying to be limitless by maintaining everything. I mean, think of the exhaustion, right? So I think these passages in Matthew and James are really powerful. That's just my 2 cents.
It also speaks to just the fear of failure. We do all these things so that we can't do really one thing well, but we can't, so we don't.
Right.
Yeah, so it's good when we hear that too, like, that's smart.
Yeah. You're exactly right. You're actually hitting on the deep rooted, right? Why we want to do it, we're afraid.
In college, I didn't pay attention very much, but one thing I did pay attention to was they tell us about opportunity costs. Like that, when you have 50 cents or whatever it costs now, let's just say 50 cents. If you have 50 cents.
Cost benefit analysis.
Well, when you buy a Coke, it doesn't just cost 50 cents, it costs everything you can use that 50 cents for in the future too. And like, when you take that to like a time basis, you know, one of the reasons why it's so hard, we're talking about committing and not like our yes be yes. One of the reasons why it's so hard to get a student to say, yes, I'll come and help you move on Saturday is because they know in their heart that means that they have to say no to those things. That not only does it cost them the time they do that, but it costs them the opportunity, it has an opportunity cost of everything else that they could possibly do. And in their mind, and in my mind too, I think that my options are unlimited, but really my options are like, help me out moving, or like just sit at it and, you know, watch TV. Like it's not, but in their mind they think, if I say yes to this, if I commit to this, and I'm saying no to who knows the wonderful things that I'm saying no to.
Okay, that is well put. And another branch of this is when we say, how do we deal with loss, and how do we teach others to deal with loss? And on a grand scale of, I lost my sibling in a car wreck, to I'm having to deal with loss by not going to this. Right? Loss is huge. My wife is, as she was learning this, and she's a great mom, has shown me and taught me a lot about that. And even we've learned in our experience of what does it mean to live with loss? You know, I told you a little bit about our story of struggling with having children, and those kind of things. And what do you do with loss? And how do you teach your students and your parents how do you deal with loss? Because when a parent encounters loss, maybe in your ministry, maybe if you're a parent in here and you encounter that, you're like, oh wow, it's just, especially when it comes towards your kids, loss is monumental. How do you say, you know what? Being a Christian means you make sense of loss. Having a biblical world and life view says, I understand loss differently through this lens than if I wasn't a Christian. Loss, it would be more monumental if I wasn't a Christian. How as a Christian does it transform my understanding of loss? So that I can actually live in and out through loss and have joy and go, that's really disappointing. I'm really kind of ticked that I'm missing these things. But you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do this and enjoy the game, right? So you can be disappointed and have loss, but it's not something that wipes you away, right? Like when Paul talks about loss in Thessalonians, to the Thessalonians, right? And they grieve without hope, right? There's a difference between grieving and without, right? Questions, thoughts? I know our time is up.
I don't know if this is really helpful, but this is just the conversation is really making me think of a book called Childhood Unbound, and I cannot remember the author, but it's phenomenal, and it talks about our culture now, how we're so busy, and kids are so busy, and how parents are actually managing their children rather than investing in relationships. And I was surprised they talked about how the emotional response of the children is anger, and how that plays out in different personalities, in different settings, and different ages. And I'm picking up on that a lot in our church, like attitudes and just undercurrents of anger towards it. And for the most part, we have really great kids in our youth group, and they're not, acting out in extreme or obvious ways, but I'm still picking up on this sense of anger of their parents. They're missing that authentic relationship with their parents, and hate being managed all the time. And so I was just thinking that might be a good resource as we're thinking about this, and maybe as we're talking to parents too, just asking them like, how do you see your role as a parent? Do you see yourself as a manager, as a server, that kind of thing.
Right. That's awesome. I think that goes back to even what Jay was saying earlier. Remember that you were saying about expectations? The mediation, and I think of this often with Jake, my son, is how do I relate? Do I relate to him through the mediator of law? Like what he needs to meet? I mean, whether that's even God's law or my law, or what am I putting towards him? Or do I mediate through Jesus? Right? Is my mediator truly Jesus? Because Dietrich Bonhoeffer has a great book about kind of what you're saying. It unpacks. How do we relate to one another? Life together. Because he says, if it's true that God has opened the way up between us and him and Jesus, reconciled, isn't it true in what Paul and Matthew and Jesus are saying about opens up the way to learn? So, it's a great question, a good analysis. Maybe asking that question, maybe doing a Sunday conversation, right? I just keep saying that, but something like that for parents to say, how do we mediate in relationships? Because of children, friends, spouses.
And the radical thing is with this managing thing is that when parents become managers of their students, like we talked to one mom who said, I asked her, do you and your husband have sweet time with each other? And she's like, well, yeah. Well, what do y'all do for dates? Because we're actually asking, you want to go on a date? What do you do in St. Louis? And she was like, well, we kind of, like, our dates are like going to see our kids' plays. We're going to see our kids do sports. And that was the answer. That was like, that's all she had, literally.
the students you have, that you are a ye, a you, right? Choose ye therefore whom you shall serve. And so if you're showing, Megan and I often talk about, how do we even talk to Jake about how we matter too, right? Because it is, and I get it. I mean, I get how you could fill up that time with all sorts, but how do we kind of say, you know what, I actually matter too in this relationship. How do I teach my son that I matter so that when he sees other people, he knows that other people matter so that two people matter in a relationship, right? And so that they get that sense too. And so when they see a marriage relationship, that they go, oh, that really matters too. And we compromise on matter, right? Like one or the other. It's either in our culture, right? We matter completely or we don't matter at all. You know? And you could probably adjust and look at all your relationships in that light. In some ways that's the one up, one down thing I was talking about yesterday. But I think mattering talks a lot about that. We're definitely over. Any other questions, thoughts before we break?
Yeah, where are good places to hang out in Nashville? Places to eat? Would you recommend?
You talking about lunch, dinner?
Or like a cool venue or...
Yeah, there's a lot of great places in East Nashville. Has some incredible places. A place called the Pharmacy, someone knew. Burger place. It's in East Nashville. There is a taco place right across the street from it.
San Antonio?
No, San Antonio Taco Company is right near Vandy, actually. That's a great place.
Near what?
Near Vandy.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Satco is right across the street. We go there after every large group on Wednesday nights. Satco, San Antonio Taco Company. It's good stuff. There are places, there's a place called Arnold's, which is famous. It's downtown. It's a meat and three place. In Nashville, they call them meat and threes. So
Is that just for lunch?
I don't know if they do dinner. That's a good question. You might want to look that up. I've only been there for lunch, so really good lunch. Near Belmont, there are a couple restaurants. One called PM, which is a great restaurant. You can get a burger, sushi. That's good. Great area. So if you, there's another place called Burger Up, which is new on the 12 South area. A bunch of places on 12 South, Mafiosos. Burger Up. There's a new barbecue place here called Edley's. Those are fun local. I'm all about the local things.
You want to give a good music spot? One of my favorite music spots in Nashville is a place called the Station Inn.
Oh yeah.
It's called the Station Inn. It's usually like a $10 cover, and it's really,
Usually bluegrass.
it's blue. It's like pretty earthy bluegrass. It's like very, very bluegrass. But it's kind of cool. A lot of famous musicians have played there, and it's a real hole in the wall. They just serve like beer and pretzels and peanuts. And it seats like 100 people, but they have shows there every night. It's really cool.
You could go on the Nashville scene, which is, if you just type Nashville scene on your phone or your laptop or whatever, it'll pull up the week event. Go into music, it'll give you the week events and venues. There are a ton of places around you can go like that. Station is a pretty laid back, fun place. Usually it's free on Sunday nights, but the only weekends.
Yeah, that's my. That's my favorite spot. It's really cool.
So there are a few. I don't know if you're wanting some more restaurants. Got plenty more that we enjoy. If you want to really, are y'all looking for like hole in the wall kind of places? That kind of, yeah. See, if you need to try and eat at Arnold's at least once for a lunch. It's pretty good. It's nasty good kind of. There's another place called actually not far from here. There's a place called Baja Burrito. It's not Baja Fresh. This is a local place, Baja Burrito. If you go, even if you take the road like you're going to the airport on Murfreesboro Pike, you go right to it almost. It's just look at a Baja Burrito. It's great. It's my favorite burrito place. So, I don't know if you may have some. East Nashville has another place called Rose Pepper Cantina. It's a fun Mexican place. It's all right there.
I heard the Pharmacy. Is that brand new?
Yeah, the Pharmacy's new. Mas Tacos, I think, is right across from me. So, I haven't eaten there yet.
Another good hole in the wall near Vanderbilt's Rotiers.
Oh, yeah. No, that's definitely. Rotiers.
Very greasy.
It's good.
Very good.
See, we got an endless supply. We got to hit them all. Okay, can I pray for us? And if you have any more questions, come grab me afterwards. Lord, I first give you praise and thanks for these brothers and sisters I have in this room, because it is a joy not just to stand and hear them speak or to speak with them, but to know that we labor together in different parts of the country, that we share not just vision of philosophy of ministry, we share the Holy Spirit, and that there is a real encouragement and humility knowing that we can kind of step out of our sphere, whether that's a church or a campus, and know that ministry is happening all over the place, and that people are doing this work. And that is a real delight. I pray that they would delight in that this week. They would delight that they are a foot or a hand or an ear or part of the body, Lord, that they can delight in. And Lord, I also ask that they would delight in you, our head, that you, Jesus, no matter how difficult the ministry is at this moment in their church or in their youth ministry, that you are still the head of the church. You're not a distant custodian. You're not someone who lobs ideas of help to us. God, you're intimately involved with us. And you know not just what's going on in our church and how we are sinners collectively, but you know our hearts personally. And you minister to us where we are in the fabric of sin that is so deeply woven in our personalities and the way that we think we could do better. God, encourage them. Give them hope that you are not just head of the church now, but you will return and all things will be made new. And I pray that you encourage them in these things in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Yeah. You did well on the recording.